So K-12 education, rewrite the narrative, right? Let's talk about that. So as we're looking at K-12 education in America, how do we rewrite the narrative to make change? What do we do?
I mean, that's a loaded question. I don't know how you answer that. The way you threw that out, I think that's interesting. I think, the interesting thing about it is that I don't think there's anybody that would tell you that that the way it's structured right now works, right? Like nobody agrees. There's consensus around, pretty broad consensus, I think, around the fact that there has to be some fundamental change. I think the question is, what's the pace of that change? What's the nature of that change, obviously? And then you've got to sort of break through some of the protectionism that's natural around a system like that. But I mean, when I think about what the experience was for me, which was, in my case, growing up, it was parochial. It was fine, it was safe, it was convenient, but it wasn't, and it was a different era, but it certainly wasn't the type of education I think that prepared me for a new economy. And I think from where I sit, the rapidity with which just everything is continually changing and the evolution of the economy and the way jobs are changing, it just requires a different kind of approach than what we've constructed for a different era. And I don't think it's fair to say that the system hasn't evolved. I just think it's a really tough thing to move quickly, and the demands of everything just need it to move quickly. And so we have to find models that accommodate for that.
I would say something just more simpler than that, like just getting more parents involved, and just really giving them the power to choose, where they want to send their kids. Kind of empowers them to be more involved as well. Like I feel like I didn't really start being involved in my kids' life until I was able to send them to the school that I felt best met our needs. Not only, do they affirm my children, but we kind of share the same values. And that was really important to me, and it made me want to, go in and build relationships with the teachers, with the school leaders, and now we're able to hold each other accountable. And I feel like in order to see a change in our school systems, we need to have more of that. And I don't feel like we can really have that if we're forcing people, you live in this zip code, so you have to go to this school. Or like before, when I was living in Greenwood Public Schools, we were forced to go to a certain school, and it was horrible. Like the only time I would go up there was to pick up my son when he was being suspended every other week, but now we're at a school where it feels like home, and our values align, and they're helping me they're really helping us to be stronger as a family unit too. Not only are they teaching my kids, but they're helping us become a better at being a family unit.
I did want to hone in on, because you used the word home, and that really struck me, because I've preached for a long time here with EdChoice that from a student perspective, having a school that you can call as home is everything, because not only does that enhance your comfort being in that school, but also encourage you to learn. Because if you are enjoying the classes that you're in, well, then you're going to put the work into it.
You spend most of your day there, too.
Right, you're going to spend the majority of your time there. You spend more time at school than you do at home. And you're going to interact with people, you're going to build those connections that are hopefully lifelong, and then you're going to be put into a position where hopefully you'll be in the best place to succeed. But if you're not in a place where you call it home, it's almost calling it a prison, really.
Can I ask a question? How do we talk about? So, I hear you say home, the entire family unit, not just the child. You're talking about the development of relationships and having to, create an environment where your kids are actually learning and want to learn. How do you do? How do you make that work in an environment where that has, you're dealing with children and families that have all kinds of issues, right, and challenges and obstacles that they face, and more basic sort of needs that teachers very often and school administrators are trying to meet in a different way, or feel that, rightly or not, are responsible for meeting in a different way? How do you envision a system working in that kind of an environment?
It's a really good question. I would almost add on to that, the concept that we're not just educating like one child who's sort of an individual isolated from the rest of the world for the 8 hours or 10 hours that they're with the school. is also a pretty important one. And I wonder, how could we kind of evolve the conversation? We talked about changing the narrative to address the fact that a child is not coming in fully isolated for just while they're in school and then going back out and coming back in every day. Like, there's a broader ecosystem at play, and I wonder how we talk about that.
Well, I think it's great. But look, you guys are the young leaders of tomorrow. I mean, do you want to keep organizing schooling the way we've been doing it? Like it's a building?
Because I'm already tired. I just got into this game in this space, 3-4 years ago, and I feel like I'm just hearing the same rhetoric over and over and over again. We're arguing about the same thing, and it's just like, I'm looking at them like, well, wow, so I'm not good enough to, to choose what's best for my child. So you're telling me that my choice is wrong. And like, just to answer your question, I've always been really passionate about bridging the gap between the homeschool and the community. Like, we can't afford for them to continue to be 3 separate entities. And then 2, just really bringing like humanity back into the conversation. Like, we're talking about kids and families. We're not talking about, I'm tired of talking about dollars, money, funding. Like, no, we're talking about these kids. Mm-hmm. And I just keep that in mind when I'm dealing with families and these children. Like, I treat them like they're a part of my family. I get to know them, like, and I realize that there's no like deadline or timeline that I'm going off. I'm like, slow is fast, fast is slow. Yeah. Taking my time getting to know people. Establishing that relationship. Before coming here today, I seen my neighbors walking around the block, and we stopped and talked about schools. Her kids go to the Oaks, and she was curious about sending her kids to Tinley, and so we're having a conversation about it. And I think that we just need more of that, like people taking the time to stop and get to know each other, checking in, like how I asked you, how you doing today, right?
How am I doing today?
How you feeling? Because you've been working hard all day. How are you feeling? Let's stop and just really take the time to check each other's posts, because we're.
It brings back that humanity for sure.
I mean, which is a great point, because that's a component I think that is lost, not just in school but in work. I mean, I think we move at such a fast pace generally that you lose a lot of those interpersonal relationships unless you really are intentional. But I think that part of it, from where I sit in my perspective, I think part of the challenge that we run into is that the debates around schooling always devolve into funding, and the conversation really is whether you're shifting dollars from this pot to this pot, or whether you're, as you like to put it, which is right, empowering parents to make decisions on their. Those kinds of conversations are solid and are super important, but the real fundamental question I think is lost in all of this is, what do we envision for you're not just saying, look, we got to create this other pot, or you got to give parents the ability to choose this school, which maybe sort of fits their needs better, but is just different from this school, but it's essentially the same option that they're getting over here, right? It's a question of, do we have to fundamentally change the way we educate people, and then how do you create models with policy that then you can have an honest debate around which one of those models may work, and how you start to drive resources.
So let's go down that road by asking this question. You could snap your fingers right now and be the head of the world, and you design the future of education, and it looks like West. Big sky thinking, no limits. What would it be? What would it be?
It would be based off of my philosophy, which is that you are a product of your own environment. My own personal perspective as a student has been that if I had gone to a public school, which was not, that was underperforming or was not meeting my needs, because let's face it, I have certain passions, I have certain things that I want to do with my life, and I have certain things I'm good at, and there are plenty, thousands of other kids that are just like me that have these passions deep down inside of them, and they need to be developed. They need to be honed on, because if you don't, then how can you say or put out this narrative that you are producing new generational leaders? Because becoming a leader means that you have to develop those skills. You have to continue to work and put in the hours that are necessary to actually become that leader, because leaders aren't born overnight, they're taught.
But do we even in the future need something called school?
I think so.
Right, so why do we need a building? Why do we need this? Think bigger than that. Think sci-fi. Think the Jetsons. You're thinking about K-12 education. What does it look like? Is it really in the same buildings? Is it really in the same structure?
That's a really interesting question.
That is interesting.
In fact, I think while we're talking about the future, it might be helpful to look at how people learned in the past, which the model, if you read like ancient history, everyone had a tutor. Alexander the Great had a tutor, right? A really smart person who his dad hired in that case to help him, right? And that was kind of the model of what you might call like upper class education for a lot of early history. Nowadays, I can go online and find a tutor in any subject and just connect with them directly. So like, I love economics, I'm like studying that on my own. I went online, I was like, hey, I'm having difficulty like learning this subject just by reading books and watching videos, like, could you teach me? And I'll pay you. I wonder if exists a model where parents can kind of take extreme ownership of their kids' education and say, yeah, my son really wants to be, I don't know, like a lawyer. Like, does he need to like go through an entire 12 years of education on a lot of things that aren't really related to that? Or can we get him the basic skills that he needs? And maybe I can pick the people who will teach him.
I'll say,
Hey, so we've been having a great conversation. Jamal's here, so join us, Jamal.
yeah, come
Good.
on
Good
now.
to see everybody.
Good to
Come
see you,
on
man.
now.
Appreciate you coming down.
Let's shake hands again.
Yeah.
Around the table, man.
Good to see you, man. Very good to see you.
Yes, there we go.
Jamal, how are you?
Doing well, doing well.
So we were just talking about how to design the future of education. Jetsons thinking, right?
Yes.
Big time future thinking. What does that look like? How do we get to that? Is it the same old school building, or is it something different? Do we even need something called a school building in the future? So we were just starting to debate that and discuss that. So join us. Anyone have any ideas?
Nice. I heard a little bit of talks about what sounded like kind of that at-home option, which I found interesting. And so one of the things, and I'm sure I missed this piece of the discussion, right, was we have 4 at home, interestingly enough. And the option of being at home seemed to work better for 2 of our kids versus the other 2. The fortunate thing we have is obviously parents who have the opportunity to make that transition, but understanding that everybody has that opportunity is one thing to make note of. But if there is a person, whether that's a guardian or parent or someone who is close to the child who can make that determination, I think having the option to not go to the school building should certainly be there. What was uncovered for me with the 2 kids who excelled at the at-home piece was how much time is wasted during a school day.
Yeah, it's all behavior management. So I'm like, get rid of the whole school. I rather, like you said, COVID really made me really think about like the school that I chose to send my kids to. Like, is this what I really want? And then I got to looking into homeschooling options and different things. And I'm like, I'd rather teach my kids with experiences. Like, we're going to the library to learn today. We're going to the State House to learn about our, those type of things. But sitting in the classroom all day is strictly them managing behaviors. For like, they could really just be done in 3-4 hours.
I just think that, so that is a really good point. I think that there's, and who knows, I don't think any of us really do, but I'm not nearly smart enough to think about what this is going to look like in 15 years or whatever. I would just say, I do think that there is we got to be careful about when we think about this, right? Because there is some kind of middle ground. To me, the future looks like experiential learning. It looks like project-based learning. It looks like a different classroom setup. It looks like a different set of experiences within the classroom, the school building. But I also do think that the school building itself, the structure of the school, for most kids probably provides other intangibles that are hard to define, but are still important to the development of the kid. And I think that's important to not overlook that. When we were having all these conversations at State House a few years ago about shifting to sort of experiential learning and on-premises internships and whatnot in the secondary space, a lot of the conversation, even amongst people that were supportive of a lot of these concepts, was if we have these conversations with the kids, look, it's hard. They don't want to be out of school. They want to be with their friends. They want to be at football games. They want to be, that's part of the experience. And so it's not that you can't replicate that. Certainly we're smart enough to come up with a system that you can, but I also don't think that we should overlook a lot of the elements that are maybe non-academic that a school provides that really are critical.
So that's the question I'm going to push back. The school provides that because the legislature says provide that, rather than the community saying I'm going to come along and take that, right?
Yeah, I think that's
and
fair.
So we've created a system where the school becomes the parent for kids, right, and becomes the de facto community leader as opposed to you guys. I mean, Nick, let me ask you. You're a younger guy. I'm guessing that you're online quite a bit.
Quite
Right?
a bit, especially this semester, yes.
Especially semester. And so could you so I've said this to my son, he went to a great school, but he probably could have learned more on YouTube. If I just sent him to YouTube University, he probably would have learned more. Do you agree with that?
I think it really depends on what it is that he's trying to do. I believe that depending on someone's career path or whatever their aspiration is in life, they have different avenues of which they can pursue learning. The school building, depending on what someone wants to do, can be archaic. It could be something that, the dinosaurs, had a better time with. And I think that, for example, with me being a sport performance major, did I need to necessarily go to college and pursue this undergraduate degree? Not necessarily. I could have easily opened up a book or pulled up some YouTube videos and took some training courses. So it really all depends on, again, someone else's career path.
So I'm hearing what you like. I'm hearing that you like sort of parents, you could do your learning. So Madam C.J. Walker and Elon Musk sit down with us right now, and they say, here's how to do some radical stuff. We're entrepreneurs. We're going to help you figure that out. What do they do? How do they change this?
So a couple of things. One, there is no cookie cutter approach.
That's right.
I think Danny makes a good point that a lot of what you learn is not done in a book or in a classroom. But there's elements that the school provides, right? But I push back and say those things can be provided, not necessarily in the school. Look, one of my kids does not want to go back to school. Like his sense of social network is like, hey, while I'm at school, leave me to my own devices and let me work. But sign me up for every travel basketball, baseball, soccer program that you can, because then I'm off, right? And it's just social at that point. He does not do well when someone in a work group is not holding up their end of the bargain.
On task and on time.
So in his mind, you know what? While I'm getting paid, I'm at work. It's just school for him, right? Leave me be. I'm at home. Leave me be for my 2 hours. And then he says, because I can get it done in an hour, whereas working with this group or sitting in this classroom while I've got a kid next to me who's misbehaving, to your point, and the teacher's spending 30 minutes just getting them to sit down, I could be done with this project and I could be moving on. So leave me at home, let me get my work done in 2 hours, and then take me to Shoot 360 so I can go get some shots up and work out, etc., where my social development comes from. And he literally is making his argument to me at 12 or 13 years old, at which point I'm going, it's hard for me to force you to go back. Meanwhile, my oldest son says, please let me go back to school. But it has nothing to do with the academics. He just misses his friends. Like, I want to get up. I want the lunchtime. Lunchtime is what I miss the most. Let me go back and be able to socialize amongst my peers, etc. So I think there's something to be said, one, about understanding that we're all different and kids are going to learn different, right, and excel different. I think one of the missing components is figuring out, so removing, for example, my kids from the scenario, and let's have a conversation about the number of young people who may not have that advocate at home for them, or even if they do, is not necessarily aware of thinking through the lens of because they're having to make some daily life decisions, right? Versus having the freedom to think about, I can sit back and ponder about what platform allows my child to learn best. How do we support those young people and create the best
that's what I'm thinking,
platform for them to excel?
My dream ideal environment would be, first of all, we would start younger than kindergarten. I believe pre-K
Facts.
Is really important. You got to have a firm foundation, but just like being able to have somebody there who can sit down with the family to see like what their values are. And how they can come alongside the family and supporting their children. I'm not saying that the children should choose their career right away, then we're, I don't know, that's kind of weird, but
yeah, that's some adults who don't
yeah.
know what they want to be, so.
I even think it's weird to declare a major right out of high school. I've changed my major so many times, still trying to obtain my degree to this day because of that. But just really coming alongside families and, like I said, determining their values and helping them reach their goals. And then two, really just teaching our kids to be critical thinkers and ask questions and, know why they believe something instead of just force feeding them information and telling them to do this way. Like, tell them why. That would be like my dream. And then two, to have relational people in charge. Like, one thing that I love about my school, I can call my CEO up of my school and kick it with him. Like, I've met other school leaders that I don't feel comfortable even doing that, and I'm like, wow, you running a school and you can't even have a conversation with me, like on the streets, or you can't even walk through my neighborhood. Like, I know my CEO, he gonna step. If we having a community cleanup, he out there to help us, And you don't get that too often. It's like kind of like it's always a us versus them thing, instead of us like working together. As a whole, and like I said, we're never going to see change if we continue to like just leave it all to the school to figure out. We can't do that. We can't.
So I agree with almost everything you said. I agree with actually everything you said, with the exception of at the end when you said we're never going to see change. Because I do think that we've
How
seen
much
an
change?
evolution.
How much?
How
much change?
I think the fact that you're able to send your
That
kids, right?
that is
So
okay. Yeah.
I think there are new models that have been created. I think there's some really innovative schools that are doing different things. I think parents have more resources available to them now if they want to take their kids someplace or create something that makes more sense that's tailor-made for their children. I do not think the system has changed with the rapidity we need it to change. I think that there's tremendous resistance to that because it's a system that's entrenched. And that has to be broken, right, or that has to be reimagined. But I do think that there has been some evolution. The real, again, I come back to this. The real question is, what you're talking about, Robert, requires community organizations. Employers are the big. We used to talk about this all the time, right? Oh, well, we need, well, in Indiana we created graduation pathways, right, which we haven't codified and we should codify, but we got graduation pathways in place. You've literally gone to these kids now, and you see these first year, 9th grade kids, and you said, if you're going to get out of high school in Indiana, we're going to get rid of this one-size-fits-all approach and get rid of this 10th grade exam that's going to, put you in a pipeline where you're never going to get out, and this is your future, and it's determined in 10th grade. So instead, you got to be employable and you got to be enrollable by the time you get to the end, right, of high school. So we started then having conversations to say, okay, so you're going to require experiential learning. So that means Salesforce or Cummins or the Pacer Sports and Entertainment or other organizations. Yeah. Now it's on you. You want to get these kids through. You want to develop a workforce. You claim that there's a shortage. Here's your opportunity.
Absolutely.
Put money on the table, get these kids in. We don't know how to manage kids. I don't know what to do with a kid that's sleeping in his car. I don't know how, my managers don't know how to manage that. Well, okay, so if we can't find employers, employers have been, a long time sort of sitting back and going, well, there's an assembly line, which is the schools. And they pump out talent, scoop them off of that, and put them to work, and it works. When that breaks down,
y'all know what to do.
or you're reimagining the education system, you better be thinking about how employers are stepping up, or they're incentivized or not, or whatever, because that's a huge component of all of it.
I've been arguing, why aren't employers running their own schools, running their own education environments, right?
I think they should.
Absolutely.
IU Health has one, right,
Yeah.
where they've actually adopted a school, Christmas Addicts, right, where they've helped build the curriculum through the lens of the employer, right, and said, hey, with all the rigor that, of course, they are required to have, but then all of the experiential expectation that the industry says a new employee must see as they walk through the doors, right? And you laden it, of course, investing in all of the social supports that they'll need. So if you have a kid sleeping in a car, or for example, child care is an issue, right? So if you have an older, and it may not be their child, but as an older sibling, I'm responsible for. So all these things are real. So as an employer, this is your pipeline of folks. You invest in it, and then they said, hey, we're going to stand behind that investment. And so any kid who comes to that fellowship, right? Ideally, you're prepared for life post-secondary if you choose to go. But if you want to enter the workforce right away, we guarantee you a position here.
See, this
so
is a great idea. So Mike, I want to hear you talk about, Governor Daniels, President Daniels now, has this program at Purdue, which is called, I think, a Boiler Up program, where he basically, where people will come and invest, instead of a student taking a loan,
Back a boiler.
back a boiler.
Back a boiler.
Instead of taking a loan, there's a group of investors that say, I'm going to invest in that child, and I'm going to put down X amount of money, and that child, we're going to help them go through, and at the end of that, they're going to give me some of their salary back, right, over time. Is that a good idea? Does that go to K-12? Do you think we should invest in our community like that?
It's revolutionary. It's something different.
The existence of an option is itself, I think, pretty revolutionary. Before this, you would have to either, have mom and dad pay for it yourself if you could somehow do that, take out a loan. And this is another option that is probably good for some people in some situations and maybe doesn't make sense for others. And I think the idea that we have enough trust in students and individuals to make the decision for themselves is, I think, the first sort of like revolutionary thing that you have to believe in order to get to the next step, which is the actual functioning program. A Milton Friedman idea, by the way. But the idea that market forces can basically provide signals to help kids figure out what careers might pay better, or at least help them understand the risk of going into a particular career is also pretty revolutionary. And I think the last piece is just, it's an alignment of incentives, right? So you've got everyone kind of pulling together, hoping that the people who are studying, and I say kids, but we should keep in mind that the typical college student is also not necessarily a young person anymore. If you look at all the different colleges and all the different systems we have in the country, you've got a lot of people who are later in their career, might be older, who are either going back to complete a degree they hadn't finished, or are switching from one industry to another, or maybe getting a degree for the first time. And I think that sort of the changing composition of college actually, I think, points to one of the questions we talked about earlier, which is like, what's the future of education look like? The idea that college is not something that you do, higher education is not something that you do for 4 years and then are done with, but rather you kind of need to continually developing skills and maybe even completely switching careers and education from one field which you have a lot of experience to one which you know basically nothing. Like that's going to be the reality for a lot of American workers, and so that higher ed component, I think, is going to change dramatically.
And to revisit that question again, I mean, you mentioned critical thinking is what we want to encourage in education. Well, it's also, we want to encourage students to ask questions and to challenge what's going on in front of them, because for any typical college student like myself, we ask questions like, why is it that this is structured in this way? And if I'm looking at the future of education and what schools look like, it would be, okay, options for anyone who is looking for something different that it hopefully will better tailor fit their needs. Because you have, as you said before, you have people that learn best online, who learn best in person, and who learn best through internships, through going out into the community and doing things that pertain to what it is they're learning about. But if you don't offer those options, then you won't see any progress. So I think that first it will be recognizing that there is a need for progress, recognizing what could be better, and then putting out options that can actually get us to that goal. Because what President Daniels is doing, even though it doesn't fit everybody and it doesn't look like something that everyone could do for themselves, they may not have the financial stability or the resources needed to do it, but it's an option. It's something that's been put out there that someone else isn't doing.
When I talk to parents, though, they're like, they want their kids to grow up and feel safe in their identity. They want to, put them in safe spaces. And then when I hear you all talk, it's all like, it sounds very transactional. And I guess that's why I'm like really big on bringing more parents to the table and really having those conversations and getting to know like who's around your kids all day, or, where your kids are coming from at home. Because I really feel like that'll bring about the like transformational change that we can keep making these transactions, put our kids through this pipeline and get them ready for the workforce. But when I talk to most parents, I can ask all of y'all, like, you want your kids to be educated.
Yep.
But I want my child to be a doctor. I want my child to, I would like for my kids to go to college, but if that is not, what they want, and that doesn't fit them, then I want them to feel comfortable enough to pursue the life that they want for themselves. And so, yeah, that's my biggest thing. It's like transaction.
So,
my
but
kid is not
let's
your
talk about
hustle.
that. So let's talk about that. So Betsy Wiley in our last meeting, one of our last guests said, the way to solve this is just basically hand everyone all their money on a card, every parent. here's the money, go educate your child. Would parents be able to, parents would be great, right? That's a way to empower them to do that,
So
right?
part of that, though, is one of the questions is how much education do parents need in this space,
Yeah.
right? Like how much, that's
Yeah.
not say education, just support, right?
Just so, yeah.
So there are, look, in my home, I'm the intern in that space. My wife is running shop. And I'm glad she is, because our kids would be completely screwed up. So if I were a single dad, I would need some support, right? There's many out there who would need, right? So, you'd be hard pressed to find a parent who says, well, I don't really care what my child becomes or what, so even if you have good intentions, you still may not have the knowledge to be able to assess what's best. Is it best that they are strictly online? Is it best that they are in a building? Is it best to have smaller classrooms? And we haven't even touched on the cultural side of things. You talk about being,
No, I know that.
you talk about
I get
being
that.
safe and comfortable.
Yeah.
Now, where I do it, so in our home, it's like ensuring that, so a space of comfort for my child is one where they see as many people as they can who look like them, who speak like them, who walk like them, who understand that culture, and the curriculum speaks to that as well. So as we talk about the freedoms to pick where they go to school, another piece of that is having some discussion about
Black
what they're
family,
being
I feel like
pitched
we either got to choose between like a good school or like a diverse school. It's like you can't have both in this space. Like if I decide to send my kids to a
facts.
private school,
It's not
they
diverse
not
much at
gonna
all.
see nobody
Absolutely.
really, probably 2-3 other people that look like them, and that concerns me, and that's why I send my kids to where I send them. So yeah, like that's when you got to talking, that's the first thing that popped in my mind. Like culturally, that's a huge
And maybe we shouldn't be comfortable, right? In this whole conversation that we've been having in the modern debate, maybe we shouldn't be comfortable. This should be an uncomfortable conversation, right?
If you, with Robert, with your question, I love the idea of ESAs, right? And I love the idea, and I know that's a bad word, we're not supposed to say that word, whatever, but I love the idea of giving parents a card and saying, here, you're in driver's seat, go buy what you want in terms of education, and then here are the supports, and
Yep.
we're gonna, okay, fine. That is, in an academic conversation, that is a really amazing concept, and maybe in practice, I think it could work, because I fundamentally believe that if you empower parents, they'll make good decisions, and if you put support structures around them, they'll make good decisions, and you can help them. That is a massive, I think for most people, that is a massive leap, right? That is a big roll of the dice, because, shit, I was right, I was getting right. Just getting going.
That is a massive,
Yeah.
that is a big goal.
Game off.
Because if we get that wrong societally, okay, we already have gaps that are going like this,
We
and
already know, yeah.
disproportionate outcomes, right? The potential disparities that can create if that experiment goes south are massive.
That probably
massive. And
so
so I
but
think
I
that
don't-
scares a lot of people, right? So even as a supporter, that kind of scares me
Yeah,
when
but
I think about what could come of that.
the disparities are there, and the idea, look, so we know there's a massive achievement gap. We know that kids of color have a much harder time reading, but let's be very clear in America, no kid can read, right? 42% eighth graders is the innate score. No kid can read, right? Now, children of color are there's a huge gap. That's an issue. But our country is in a situation, maybe we do just pull the Band-Aid off. Let's try this, right? Let's come, because it's not working now, right? And it's clearly not creating uncomfortable conversations with our communities the way it should be, because they're still the same people, the same structures. And so maybe the conversation should be really uncomfortable, and we should say, let's just go ahead and do that. Let's pull this Band-Aid off, give parents power, and let me become a social worker again, right? So I can be an education coach, right, instead of a policy advocate. Because we're talking, you're right, at this level up here, right? So we're talking policy, we're not talking about parents, right? And parents are much different, right? But when given the power to choose, parents choose often wisely, and certainly disinterestedly, according as I believe, right? And they have the capability to choose once you give them the power to choose. So there's this conversation like, do we really trust people? Do we not trust people? Do we trust families? Do we trust parents?
I think you should, and honestly, in order to change things in a big way, you have to make big changes. I know we around this table want to make some of those big changes, and as a society, I think a lot of us are trapped in this position of complacency where you don't want to move because there's a threat, a risk of things going south and things not being successful. But then if you don't take that bet on yourself the same way an entrepreneur would say, I'm going to bet on myself and move down to this state and start this business because I believe in it that much. If we don't bet on ourselves and bet that our ideas could be right and could create a massive change that fundamentally changes the lives of every other child who grows up and becomes these transformational leaders. And if we do this, then we will see something great happen. But if we don't take the step, if we don't create that leap, then nothing will happen. We'll stay where we are.
To a certain degree, we are actually already doing this experiment,
Yeah,
though.
for sure.
Correct.
Because, so my personal story, I went to a small private school on the south side of Indy when I was growing up, and then moved to Fishers for the schools, Hamilton Southeastern School District, around the time I was in 6th grade. My siblings and I had the choice. We could either go to a different private school there, or we could go to the public school system. I actually picked the public school because it was a pretty good school. It had a lot of kids, and I wanted to meet more people, and it was much bigger. I just did better in that environment. But my parents actually kind of had the credit card that Robert was talking about. Like, we could afford to do that. We kind of had the education dollars to do that. And we see around the country people who can choose better schools for their kids. Often that is the primary motivator for why they live where they live. So to a certain degree, we are kind of already doing this experiment. The thing is that we're not doing it in anything resembling a sort of fair way from like a tax standpoint of just getting your education.
Or even a fair way in terms of access and opportunity
Yeah.
for all different groups of people, right?
Right.
But I mean, think about it this way. I mean, all of us, I'm guessing, use Amazon, right?
Too much.
Too much, she says, too much, right? I use Amazon. We don't question people's ability to choose on Amazon. And by the way, that's poor, white, rich, black. I mean, no one has that question. Why can't we make Amazon education? Why can't we have an education that's so customized, so open to families to do this?
So that's a little loose, right? Amazon's got a refund policy.
Okay?
If I screw it up, I can send it back.
Love that idea.
The problem is,
These are people.
there's people. There's no refund policy for some of this. So that's one.
That's
I
one.
get where you're going, but
I got a refund policy. Make the schools, if you send your kid there and it doesn't work, the schools actually have to pay you back.
so that's great. But what about the kid?
But then you lose time
And
that
the
was
kid.
put in on the kid,
Yeah,
and
the
then
kid.
they lose
There is no
education.
refund for that kid.
The fundamentals of it, though, I think are.
I get where
in
you're
my
going.
opinion, are right.
No, I
right?
get it.
You're-
No, I'm not-
You're betting on people. You're betting on families to make good decisions, and I think that's largely a safe bet. I don't know. See, I just keep coming back to. I think I don't know that we need to go here tomorrow. I think that we are moving the needle or making changes as it pertains to creating more flexibilities. I think we need to go much, much, much faster, and I think ultimately we do need to provide families with the supports and the authority to sit in the driver's seat for their kids' education. I think that's absolutely true, but I don't think that means necessarily
I just think
going
about the
to
regulations
abolishment.
and stuff that comes with, like, when I talk to homeschool parents, they don't want support
Yep.
because then there's going to be more rules and regulations that they have to follow. So with this money, that's what I think about, and when I have conversations with families about it, trying to bring them to the table so that we can kind of like help come up with those regulations so it'll work for us. Like I said, we're gonna choose.
that.
We're gonna choose regardless. My mom, she used my grandparents' address to get me to the school that she wanted me to go to. Before then, she was paying for me to go to private. Like, we're gonna make it happen, whether y'all give us this money or not. We're gonna make it happen. I can say, as a mother of 3, I'm gonna figure it out for my kids. But the fact that there is, we are evolving.
Not fast enough.
That's not Jeff. Not
That's-
Yeah,
that's-
we're evolving,
that's
and
true.
there's resources out there. Somebody told me the other day we're like resource rich and systems poor, and I've just been thinking about that all day, every day. So like, how can we like keep having these conversations with each other, being intentional with our language, so that you don't have to have worked in education for 10, 20 years to understand what you're saying. How can we
By the way, lead a lot of different people in a lot of different communities, maybe to have ownership of schools and education that they don't have now.
I mean, we did talk a little bit right at the outset of the fact that the conversation inevitably devolves to funding because ultimately the choices are fairly similar, right?
Once it's
We don't have a debate around whether or not the system as it's currently structured is the right system, period, right? Whether or not there's another way
Yeah.
to deliver school, forget about the mechanism for delivering schooling. Whether or not the way that we educate kids, the structure that we have and all that kind of stuff is the right structure. That should be the fundamental debate, because that's really the most important question. If we're educating kids in a system that is misaligned to where we're headed as an economy and where we're headed as a society, then it doesn't matter. When employers stop caring about where you went to college, and they all say they do, right? Oh, well, we're going to hire a bunch of people. There was just an article the other day in the Wall Street Journal, and I forget who it was, IBM or somebody said, well, we're going to start this thing. We're going to stop hiring because it's a barrier to entry. We're going to stop requiring for entry-level jobs. Okay, well, I get it, but if for the higher paying jobs, you continue to say, this is the skill set, right, that we need, and by the way, if you don't have this degree and this degree, you're going into a computer system that's filtering your resume out anyway, and we're going to require it, then it's going to continue to be, that's where the dollars are going to follow.
So that's a great segue into this idea. The two questions. Two adjectives that you would say describe the current education system, and two adjectives that describe what you want to see.
Two adjectives.
So you said
I just
employer-driven.
feel
You said employer-driven is one of
That's
them,
loaded.
right? Employer-driven
I
is
think
one.
it's employer informed. Yeah, I hate employer driven, right? But it's employer informed. It has to be driven largely by what employers signal they need
Yep.
or will. And I think the current is, and my adjective for the current is, I think it's mediocre. I think that's what we are, in mediocrity.
And complacent then.
Complacent.
I'll say that although it is moving, albeit slowly, it's antiquated. The fact that kids get out at 2:45 in the afternoon,
Agreed.
3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you don't get off of work until 5. So for those of us with means, my wife stays at home. Not a big deal, right? I mean, my wife might disagree with me, right? But those, a single mom who's got to figure that thing out with that 3-hour gap between the time the kids get out. But that was when we were in the fields growing crops, and the farm day was dictated by a 7 to 3. Like, it's antiquated.
It is antiquated.
And think of what you could do with that time, right? You could do playtime. You could do
Absolutely.
art. You can do humanities. You can do other things that are these critical things that everybody says it's the soft skills and the
Absolutely
critical
right.
thinking.
And you made a very good point. The basic skill set of thinking, I think, is lost, right? The ability to make a decision, like a thoughtful decision, not just not just
why
count
you want-
beans,
Yeah, and know why, and like,
but to think through it. Yeah,
Yeah.
And be okay standing on your at that critical thinking piece is absolutely lost. Not to mention what I think COVID uncovered, and I mentioned it earlier, which is the amount of time even though they get out at 2:45, the amount of time wasted in between that 7 or 8 a.m. to 2:45. The amount of schoolwork you could do it in 2 hours and be
Easy.
done.
2 hours.
I'd say inefficient is one word we could definitely use.
Complacent, inefficient, employer-led, going as a word.
Well-intentioned.
Well-intentioned.
I think the system is well-intentioned, and the people playing in it have goals that they think, at least to themselves, are pretty noble.
So my board members used to say to me, God save me from the good well-intentions of people,
the
right?
road to hell
Well, I-
is paved.
Good
I
intentions.
would clarify that well-intentioned is not a compliment.
Yeah, no, I get it. So now let's look at the future.
I push back on well-intended depending on the subject we're teaching.
Yeah,
There are
that's
some
what I'm
people-
like, I
So
Yeah.
if my child is in a social studies class that embraces a bunch of European history, and you're embedding that, I question your intentions
Yep.
there. And you send my child home,
Right.
and their self-esteem is kind of embedded in that piece.
And I'm still
That's a
trying
whole
to think
nother
of an
discussion.
adjective, but my daughter had iLearn last week, and they had social studies and science, and she said, I don't understand why we have to do this portion of the test when we don't learn this in school. So they're not even covering all of this
Any of that
stuff in
stuff.
school. And I thank God, like, I have the means to, supplement what they're not getting at school, but not everybody has that. And so
What's the
Adjective,
future? What's the
adjective.
future adjective? I mean, is there some aspirational? I mean, Nick, so you got the opportunity to get a scholarship, and you've said before it's changed the direction of your life, right? And what word would you use if everyone had that opportunity? What would the future of education look like if you had that? Everyone had that opportunity.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
So that question. So framing the adjective around the future as you see it on the current trajectory, or if you had a genie and could rub the
Genie.
bottle.
It's the genie. It's the genie in the bottle, right? Rub the genie in the bottle and give me the adjective.
Progressive.
Progressive.
One that is designed, and its intentions are to lead someone a student on the direction that is not only geared towards their own maximum education and success, but what it is that they are passionate about and want to do. Because if I hadn't discovered these passions because of my ability to have a parent and myself choose where I would be best going to school, then I wouldn't have discovered what I want to do with my life, nor would I be able to be a functioning member of society that wants to make a difference that is positive in that society and hopefully in the world entire. So it would be progressive, one that is all about drawing out progress and drawing out the best in people through relationships and trying to be your best every time you come into work.
I think practical and effective are the two adjectives we most need to see describe our school system. I mean, effective in the sense that they actually teach children what we already currently are expecting them to teach. We talked about reading. Most kids can't read, certainly not at the level that we expect, and then we pretty much doom them for life, those kids who we push forward through the system anyway, not teaching them what we originally set out to do, but adding in a bunch of other expectations along the way. So, the effective, we have to execute on sort of the basics of education. I think that's really important, but also practical in the sense that it gives people the tools they need to be effective in the workforce, and not just the workforce we have today, but what the workforce could look like, by the time they're in their careers. So I think those two things are absolute must-haves.
I love that. I want it to be unencumbered. Right, to me, this idea of unencumbered education where it doesn't matter where you are, you get in where you fit in, whatever the mentality is, how can we come alongside parents? It's parent-led, it's student-driven, and it's unencumbered, right, on this idea of the future. And if someone is living or dead, someone's living or dead of an entrepreneur or a huge leader that's missing from this table for this conversation, who should be at this table, living or dead, here, right now?
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
My mother.
Your mother. I love that.
I like
she's
that.
had to navigate so many different spaces. Like, her story is phenomenal, just with raising me and my sister and starting over at 40. I have a brother who has Down syndrome and autistic. Didn't know where could he be serviced where she was living. Had to move out to Fishers in order to get the services that he needs. Or even before she moved out there, she was traveling back and forth. So yeah,
Mother, that's
my
great.
mother.
Well, that's not fair because I had to go before.
You chose to go
I
first.
should have waited. I would have had a better answer.
Come on.
How about you follow up your mom?
At least I'm not going next.
Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, come on.
Wow. I actually would choose an entrepreneur who I respect and admire. His name is Max Tuning, and he is doing a lot of some similar things I want to do with my life, and he is growing and very successful. He launched a business, took some of those risks, packed up, moved from Virginia down to Houston, Texas, and now is moving his candy company, which he started based off of something he thought was missing from the market in terms of sour candy, and is moving it into Walmarts and Targets. I mean, that's awesome because I want to do something similar in terms of those fundamental aspects of growing a business, being successful from the ground up. So that's who I would add to the conversation. And I think from an educational standpoint, hearing his perspective of how he arrived where he is now and what pieces put him in the position where he is would be valuable to have in the conversation.
I think it'd be interesting to have someone from a different country who could talk about their education system.
New Zealand, somewhere from New Zealand.
Yeah, I'm not sure what country, but someone who's not gone through our system. Big countries like China and India come to mind, but also a place like New Zealand, some places just doing it differently. Maybe we mentioned Nigeria, which is going to be one of the largest countries in the world very soon.
That's right.
I'd be very curious to hear what somebody from a different part of the world thought, and would wonder if maybe they would even be like more positive towards our system than we are, or maybe more negative, and just to hear that perspective I think would be helpful.
Yeah, I think so. I think that'd be great. Jamal?
I'm stumped, man. I'd love to hear from. I like the different country piece.
Yeah, I think so.
Like even historically, It'd be nice to have whoever the foreman was in Egypt when they were building the pyramids, the guy who was in charge of,
That's interesting.
or lady who was in charge of, but probably the guy who was in charge of that production, right? I mean, that's a little tongue in cheek, but I love the idea of someone who hasn't grown up in this space, lived it, and have an outside perspective of assessing.
I love the idea of having an outside assessment. That's really great. And look, I really appreciate you guys' time and having a conversation with us about what the future
And my
of education-
mom, by the way, because she put me on the spot, right? So
Bring all
I
ours
just
on.
want
in case my mom sees
Yeah.
this thing, there's no way I
Yeah,
get to
my-
come home for Thanksgiving without
It's hard to
her
follow up
saying-
mom, right?
is hard to follow
It's
up
always
mom,
hard to
yeah.
follow up mom. But I really appreciate your time and really thank you for joining us today and having this conversation. So thanks.
you.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
everybody.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
We solved it.
What are you thinking? Like, you don't want to have statistics? Damn lies, they say?
I'm actually with her. You can make